We didn't talk for 10 years. 10 years. That's a long time to really not talk.
He was the visionary behind some of the most iconic motorcycles in America. Paul Teutul Jr., the creative genius of American chopper, built more than bikes. He built a cultural phenomenon. But behind the sparks and steel was a family war that cost him everything: his company, his peace, and even his relationship with his father. Could the price of fame have been too high? And has the pain ever truly healed? We'll retrace his early life, his rise with OCC, the fiery feud with his father, the lawsuits, and the painful truth about where things stand today. Childhood in the iron works. Most kids in the mid-1980s spent their afternoons riding bikes, watching cartoons, or playing Nintendo. But Paul Teutul Jr.'s childhood was cut from a very different mold. At just 12 years old, while other kids were trading baseball cards, Paul Jr. was pushing a broom across the oil-stained floors of Orange County Iron Works, his father's fabrication business. The heat inside the workshop was relentless. Sparks rained from welding torches, and the noise of grinders echoed against the steel walls. For Paul Jr., this wasn't punishment. It was the beginning of his education, a crash course in hard work that few kids his age would ever experience. Even before that, Paul Jr. had been drawn to the world of metal. He would often visit job sites with his father, scavenging small scraps of steel that the workers had tossed aside. While others saw junk, young Paul saw opportunity. He would gather those discarded fragments and shape them into tiny sculptures. They weren't refined or polished, but they revealed something remarkable: an instinct for design. In the hands of a boy barely out of elementary school, cold steel became art. These small creations hinted at a mind that could see beyond the ordinary, an ability to transform raw material into something meaningful. When Paul Jr. turned 14, he was already far away from sweeping floors and was engaged in welding, hardly an awkward teenage attempt at first-time welding. The older men who held the welding torch caught the attention of the youngsters in the shop, trained men who could have been doing the job for decades. Some of them were skeptical initially, guessing that this was against the boss's son, but they appropriated him, not very willingly at times, with a place in the fold, knowing very well that the kid was very skilled, in steadiness of hands, sharp focus, and the complexion of twice times more age in the making. But getting under the Paul Teutul Jr. is not a bed of roses. The senior had very strong specifications regarding toughness, sometimes brutally, with the philosophy that there were not just mistakes, but failures. Failing in this case was non-negotiable. Paul Jr. learned just how harsh the punishments inflicted by Senor were should he misstep. Senor would not wait until a private, quiet moment. He raised his voice and, more often than not, treated Paul Jr. to full-throated scolding in front of the entire crew. Some employees whispered it as being unfair. Senior has rules for cutting no one slack on his son. But according to Senior, that would make him stronger. Pressure makes steel, and he would make steel in his son too. Public persecution of the pen can sting, but it has also forged out part of Paul Jr.'s character. Every time his father would reject what he suggested or would yell at him for even a minor mistake, Paul Jr. stood with these options: shrink back or push forward. Push forward time and again, and indeed, he did. He went on to consider mistakes, not weaknesses, but opportunities to make improvements. Veiling the scolding under a workbench, he tried again. Over time, resilience was his characteristic. That same refusal to back down would later prove very helpful in episodes that involved him and his father colliding on national television. Seldom was there ever a sturdy respect seemingly placed upon one another, but so seldom did it come out loud. Once, Paul Jr. redid a railing that brought strength and visual appeal as a requirement in a single design. At first, his father banged it out himself, unnecessarily changing and brushing off. But the days that passed, without saying a thing, Panico approved the design and put it on wheels. Quite a small victory, but to Paul Jr. it meant everything. Father's silence spoke more than was said. Within even himself, father valued son's creativity. Pride kept from admitting so openly. Those early sparks of creativity would soon ignite a fire that reshaped his family's destiny and led to their greatest battles. From ironworks to choppers. By the time Paul Teutul Jr. was 19, the kid sweeping up shavings had transformed into a respected craftsman running the railing division of Orange County Ironworks. That wasn't a token title handed down from his father. It was earned through grit, late nights, and the kind of vision most young men his age couldn't even imagine. The railing division wasn't some side project either. It was half of the company's income. Customers lined up for designs stamped with Junior's name, willing to wait longer and pay more for the kind of detail and artistry that set his work apart. Leading a team of older, seasoned workers wasn't easy, but Paul Jr.'s consistency and natural authority slowly won them over. Even the toughest skeptics, veterans of steel and construction, came to respect the young man who could not only weld, but lead. Still, Paul Jr. was restless. He had mastered railings, staircases, and the structural artistry of ironwork, but something inside him wanted more. He felt boxed in, like his creativity was caged behind repetitive designs and practical limitations. Nights often found him at his workbench sketching ideas that had nothing to do with railings or construction contracts. Instead, he drew motorcycles, machines filled with curves, edges, and personality. His notebook became a secret outlet for his imagination, a place where he could pour his visions without the shadow of practicality looming over him. These sketches weren't childish fantasies. They revealed an artistic side that was beginning to grow restless, searching for the right canvas. That opportunity arose not out of a business idea, but from a coincidental instant. By the end of the late 90s, Paul's dad, always with a warmth for motorcycles, started tinkering with bikes again. It was supposed to be just for fun, a pastime to counter the grind of earthy ironworks. One day, he got his son to help him out. When Paul Jr. pulled out his sketches, he was shocked. They weren't just technical diagrams, but visions. The lines were clean, the angles bold, and the overall feel of the design was nothing but artistic, standing out immediately. For Paul Sr., who leaned on brute strength and old-school practicality, it was an eye-opening moment. That was the spark. For years, the father and son had differed in the ways they worked in the iron shop. Suddenly, though, with motorcycles at least, they had something in common. Paul Sr. provided the muscle, the old-school grit, and the iron discipline. Paul Jr. was the detail, the artistry, and a fresh set of ideas. It was a perfect marriage of strength and finesse, and it didn't take long before it would form the basis of one of the United States' most recognizable custom bike shops. In 1999, the company Orange County Choppers was founded. Some $175,000 of seed money had been scraped together from profits belonging to Orange County Iron Works, but the ownership split was not equal. Paul Sr. kept 80% for himself, and Jr. got 20%. At first, it was an irrelevant fact. They did not think about contracts and percentages at that moment. Those days were simply father and son building bikes in a cold basement with almost no tools to get the job done. They made do with what they did not have by sheer willpower. Their first major build was a chopper the guys dubbed True Blue, and 4 very long, hard months went into that project. Long nights in the shop, welding without end, paint jobs that seemed to take forever with all those sanded imperfections, and in the end, a bike that belonged on the cover of a magazine. Blue paint with white flames and clean lines that commanded respect and awe wherever it showed up. By the time they took it to Daytona in 1999, everyone was amazed. No garage hobbyists built this one. This was the work of builders, and people started to take serious notice. But the early years were tough. Their workshop was minuscule and freezing during winter, and the equipment broke down almost as often as they worked. Suppliers expected prompt cash up front, and it was a real struggle to get cash. Paul Jr. used to work up to 18 hours a day, once even sleeping on the couch of the shop, just so he was on schedule. Everyone's tempers were constantly flaring. The The fights that happened between father and son were never staged for a camera. This was real bred out of stress and survival. Each motorcycle hardly cleared the bills, and yet they trudged on because neither could stop. What began as a basement dream would soon explode into a reality TV empire. But with that spotlight came cracks no one could hide. American Chopper fame and strain. When American Chopper premiered on March 31st, 2003, no one inside that cramped New York shop had any idea what was coming. Within 3 episodes, the series exploded, drawing over 3 million viewers each week. What had begun as a gamble with a small contract and low expectations quickly snowballed into a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, the Teutul's weren't just building motorcycles, they were building television moments that millions of households tuned in to watch. The small, freezing workshop that once barely kept the lights on became a tourist destination. Fans wanted pictures, autographs, and, most importantly, Paul Jr.'s bikes. From the start, the contrast between father and son made for perfect television. Paul Sr., with his booming voice, quick temper, and no-nonsense approach, became the archetype of the gruff, old-school builder. He barked orders, slammed doors, and never hesitated to call someone out, especially his son. But what kept fans coming back wasn't just the yelling, it was watching Paul Jr.'s artistry unfold in silence. He could stand over a gas tank for hours, his movements slow and deliberate, his concentration absolute. The producers noticed that viewers were mesmerized by this. One particular scene, where Jr. shaped a tank without dialogue or music, became one of the most requested clips in the show's history. The contrast between noise and quiet, rage and focus, became the formula that powered American Chopper. Jr.'s designs raised the entire show to levels far beyond just fabrication. His creations weren't simply motorcycles, they were statements. The Black Widow bike became an instant icon, a stunning, webbed steel design with meticulous attention to detail. It was admired not only by the custom bike fans, it crossed over into mainstream pop culture, with merchandise, model kits, and even video games inspired by it. More than 280,000 model kits of the Black Widow were sold in just 6 months. All of a sudden, Orange County Choppers wasn't just a shop, it was a brand. Afterward came the Firebike, a project that redefined what possibilities Paul Jr. could imagine, with both metal and meaning. Built in 2003, the Firebike paid homage to hundreds of firefighters who lost their lives due to terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. More than a machine, the Firebike was a weighty burden of grief and remembrance. Each fragment of its design told a story, from the flames painted along its body to the jagged chunk of steel taken from the wreckage near the World Trade Center. And Paul Jr. didn't delegate that part either. He welded it on himself. This bike sported 343 hand-painted emblems, one for each firefighter lost, requiring him to re-engineer the frame itself to hold the weight of it all. The Firebike drew tears as much as applause upon unveiling. It was no motorcycle, it was a living memorial. The limelight brought in by the show placed Paul Jr. as an emerging talent, but fame had its price. The cameras were always on, and the pressure seldom relented. Deadlines were shorter, the expectations higher, the shop dynamics more unpredictable than ever, and with the producers encouraging fights that spiked ratings, animosity became common. Jr. had told his father early on that the cameras would have a way of making them act like caricatures. He even wrote a letter, 5 pages long, imploring his father to reconsider. But by that time, it was too late. The Discovery Channel had struck reality TV gold. A son and father were at odds amidst roaring engines and clashing egos. Behind the successful ratings, however, there was an increasing strain. When Sr. viewed lateness or lack of discipline in Jr., Jr. was frustrated by being treated like a child, although he shouldered the creative part of the business alone. What audiences do not see is that the documentary fights have mostly been half the story. When all the lights go dark, tension consolidates rather than dissipates. Indeed, though fame and money flooded in, the cracks in the Teutul family dynamics quietly began to form. For every bike, though, was a double-edged sword for Paul Jr. Every bike design advances him a little higher up the fame ladder, but every success also adds a little more fuel to his father's jealousy and anger. All this spectacular genius makes him a star and drives the wedge that is between him and the man who first lit a torch for him. Fame made them stars, but it also turned their shop into a powder keg, one that would eventually blow their family apart. The family war turns legal. By the mid-2000s, the tension between Paul Sr. and Paul Jr. was no longer just an undercurrent. It was the storm everyone saw coming. The cameras had captured enough shouting matches to keep the ratings high, but what they missed was even more explosive. Behind the scenes, the Teutul workshop wasn't just a place for bikes. It had become a battlefield where father and son waged war over respect, control, and pride. The breaking point came in September 2008. Junior was late again, something that had become a sore spot for his father. In most businesses, a late arrival might earn a scolding or a warning. In the Teutul shop, it sparked a full-blown meltdown. Senior erupted in front of the crew, unleashing years of pent-up frustration. Junior fired back, insisting that no matter when he walked in, the work always got done. The shouting escalated until Paul Jr., red with rage, hurled a chair across the office. A trash can followed. He kicked down a door and stormed out, while Senior chased after him. On the shop floor, in front of everyone, Paul Sr. fired his son on the spot. That moment made up one of the most infamous scenes in American chopper history. Clips of Junior throwing the chair turned into memes many years later, but at this time, it was crushing. The father-son bond on which Orange County Choppers was built fell apart in front of the entire world. And this was not just a dramatic pause for television. This was the end of their working relationship. The domino effect followed almost immediately. The crew was made up of some who supported Junior and others who were too frightened to defy Senior. The customers wondered if the bikes would still have the same magic without the designer who had defined the brand. Even TLC, the network that aired the show, started getting nervous. They were somehow hustling Junior to get him to return temporarily as a contractor, hoping to keep the cameras rolling. But the damage was done. By April of 2009, Paul Jr. was officially gone. It is not enough for Senior that he has lost a son. He wants him out of the business completely. Junior still held 20% of Orange County Choppers, a stake that allowed him an ear in the company his designs had made famous. Senior was in a hurry to silence him. He simply wanted to buy out Junior's stake, offering $500,000 for a piece of a business that had grown from a mom-and-pop shop to a multi-million-dollar empire. Junior would not accept this, which is when Senior went on to file a lawsuit against not only his son, but Orange County Choppers itself, thereby putting his company on both sides of the same case. The legal battle was vicious. Senior extended the lawsuit beyond the buyout. He demanded additional damages of $1 million, picturing Junior as the disruptive and disloyal son. It was a twisted strategy, meant to financially and mentally crush his son, compelling him to surrender. Much of the case revolved around wording in a contract that vaguely stated that Senior could purchase back Junior's shares at fair market value. But what exactly was fair market value? Senior argued it meant whatever he was willing to pay. Junior argued it meant the real value of a viable company built upon his designs. It was that single line of text that became the focal point of the courtroom face-off. Losing his place in the shop was devastating, but Paul Jr. wasn't finished. His greatest rebellion was still to come: building his own empire. When Paul Jr. walked out of Orange County Choppers for the final time in 2009, many believed it was the end of his career. He was the designer, yes, but without the platform of American Chopper or the resources of his father's empire, what chance did he have to survive on his own? To make matters worse, his exit contract included a one-year non-compete clause. For 12 long months, he couldn't build a single motorcycle. For a man whose identity revolved around designing and fabricating bikes, it felt like being locked in a cage. But instead of crumbling, Paul Jr. adapted. He turned to product design. using his eye for form and function in unexpected places. One of his first projects was redesigning a Coleman camping grill. Then came a public dog park, followed by custom dog toys. None of it carried the roar of an engine, but it kept his creative spark alive and proved he wasn't a one-trick pony. That pivot during his darkest time set the stage for everything that followed. In April of 2010, the time or period when the non-compete ended, and Paul Jr. returned to his original calling at that moment. He didn't just open doors to a new shop, but made a point, definitely across the street from Orange County Choppers, opened Paul Jr. Designs. This place was not some random coincidence. It was defiance, a message to the world, to his father and his old crew. He ain't going anywhere, and he didn't go alone. One by one, some of the most loyal and talented OCC employees crossed the road with him. Vinny DiMartino, for years the backbone of builds, Joe Pugliafico, Nub Collard, Cody Connolly, and even his younger brother, Mikey. Their leaving OC wasn't just staffing changes, it was mutiny. Senior may have had the hold on the building and the brand, but Junior carried the soul of the shop away with him. The Discovery Channel was quick to realize the knock-on effects of drama. Under this spin-off centering on the ongoing family feud, American Chopper, Senior versus Junior, saw the light of day in 2010. Cameras could be a double-edged sword for Paul Jr. While moving all audience eyes toward boosting his new brand, they also turned his private wounds into a spectacle for entertainment. Yet, he dove into that opportunity. He aimed at something more, not merely surviving but outbuilding his father while everyone watched on national television. Paul Jr. Designs was established almost immediately. In the absence of his overbearing father, Junior's creativity blossomed. He took on enormous corporate clients, much bigger than anything OCC approached. He built a World of Warcraft bike with Blizzard Entertainment and worked with Paramount on promotionally driven builds. But that was not it. He even worked with very big consumer product names. Before long, Paul Jr. was no longer a simple custom bike builder, but actually a designer for global giants. For every win, though, there was an unshakable void, the painful absence of family in his life's biggest moments. Love, faith, and healing. In the middle of lawsuits, production contracts, and the chaos of Senior versus Junior, something unexpected happened to Paul Jr. He fell in love. It was 2008 when he met Rachel Beast, a boutique owner who, unlike many around him, had no ties to the motorcycle industry or reality TV. She wasn't dazzled by the fame or intimidated by the Teutul name. Instead, she saw Paul Jr. for who he really was, a man trying to hold himself together under the crushing weight of family betrayal. Their connection gave him something he hadn't had in years: balance. By the summer of 2010, just months after launching Paul Jr. Designs, the two married. It was a grand event, filmed for television, complete with a 6-tier cake made by Buddy Valastro of TLC's Cake Boss. The cameras captured the decorations, the vows, the celebration, but what they couldn't hide was the most glaring absence. Paul Sr. had been invited, but he didn't come. The empty chair where his father should have been spoke louder than any speech. For Junior, it was bittersweet. Surrounded by friends, family, and even television crews, he couldn't escape the truth that his father's absence overshadowed the day. It was proof that the wounds between them ran deeper than any contract or court ruling. Though their relationship was rocky, he was actually grounded by Rachel. She was much more than just the backbone, but rather his support. Together, they would rely on faith, a concept that he barely brushed against before. Over the years, their spirituality flourished and took a different direction in life, a new way of looking at problems. In a surprisingly open moment, Paul Jr. admitted that prior to tying the knot, "We abstained from all forms of fullness until the wedding night." This was based on our spiritual perspectives as a couple. It could be said that it was a life-changing lesson for him because it was a way for him to learn patience, self-control, and how to opt for long-term meaning instead of the short worth of impulse. More than just personal, faith became a major part of his identity. He started to become vocal about his beliefs. He had never used his voice back during the top seasons of American Chopper. He began addressing forgiveness, healing, and finding purpose beyond fame and fortune in public talks and interviews. This was surprising information for fans who only knew him as either the quiet designer or the hot-headed son during the shout-out matches with his father. Yet, it remained true to form. He was moving away from being a simple reality television character. Undoubtedly, it was the most life-changing turn, probably on or before 2015, when Paul Jr. and Rachel became parents. Their trip to have a child is not as easy as it seems. After numerous disappointments, a short trip to Nashville led to being pregnant after almost 2 years without success. With the birth of their son, Hudson, Paul Jr. claims that everything changed. And for him, perception changed completely while holding the child. He felt a surge of understanding when he realized for the first time that everything he saw as anger and pain in his father was different. It hurt to see his own son walk away, even though he couldn't admit it. But it planted the seed of forgiveness, even if it didn't wipe out all the years of fighting. Yet even as he found personal peace, the cameras weren't done exploiting his fractured bond with Paul Sr. The Last Ride and Lingering Distance. By 2018, nearly a decade had passed since Paul Sr. had fired his son in that infamous explosion of rage. The years in between had been filled with lawsuits, spin-offs, and silent standoffs. But television wasn't finished with the Teutuls. Discovery Channel, eager to reignite the ratings fire, pushed for a reunion. It wasn't pitched as reconciliation. It was marketed as a chance to rebuild a legendary motorcycle together. For Paul Jr., the proposition was complicated. He knew how staged it would feel. Yet the opportunity to honor their shared history was hard to ignore. The project chosen for the so-called reunion was the Yankees-themed chopper, originally built in 2005. Once sold off, it had resurfaced in a damaged state. Producers spun the rebuild as symbolic, father and son fixing something broken. Behind the cameras, though, there was little healing. Filming schedules were carefully separated to minimize clashes. Ground rules were laid down in advance. Backup plans existed in case arguments spiraled out of control. Both men smiled for the cameras, but beneath the surface, the silence between them remained as deep as ever. Allegedly, Paul Sr. downplayed the tension when telling reporters that they were a little older, a little wiser. Says someone who worked on the project, but the atmosphere was very sharp-edged and filled with unspoken bitterness. Later, Paul Jr. himself admitted that they patched the bike together, but that the entire experience did nothing to mend their damaged relationship. Meanwhile, the fans had their hopes. There was social media speculation that maybe, just maybe, the two had reconciled. In 2020, 2 years later, Discovery made the ultimate attempt with a 2-hour special titled The Last Ride, intended for closure by inviting Sr. and Jr. to also work together on a motorcycle with a patriotic theme commissioned by ABC Supply. But from the moment they started filming, nothing appeared much different. Sr. bristled at Jr.'s ideas with gut instinct, recapitulating the dynamics that had torn them apart years before. For those crew members who knew the history, it was like a walk down memory lane. The cameras rolled, tensions started to brew, and the so-called Last Ride course started to take on the semblance of yet another chapter in the same old book. It was almost impossible to ignore the significance of the project. Father and son squabbled over an idea even as the original OCC shop was being literally torn down in the background. Once, echoes with sparks and shouting fell down to ruins comparable to the disintegration of their relationship itself. There were a few precious times, those quiet minutes at the workbench where there were no cameras, when Paul Jr. said it felt like the old days, just two guys building, minus the racket, minus the fame. But all those moments were few and far between, quickly shoved under a pile of production deadlines and age-old grievances. Paul Teutul Jr.'s life is proof that fame can build legends, but it can also break families. And as he prepares to finally tell the raw truth in his new memoir, one thing is certain: his story isn't finished yet. If you want more deep dives into the untold stories behind icons like Paul Jr., make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't miss the video on your screen right now.